Here's a quick look into today's episode.
Dumping all this information, all this knowledge, all these 30 years of experience of an incredibly, and giving them to these new field grade officers. My name is not Raphael, it's Raphael. And growing up, my parents made sure that I knew how to pronounce it correctly. Raphael Vasquez. My dad, he didn't say it all the time, but if you asked him, he would say, I'm Mexican by birth and American by grace of God. That's who I am. That's where I come from. A place of anything is possible in the world, and juxtaposed with, yeah, but you got to put the work in. And my man shows up with a black beret and he launched it. Launched it. That dude never recovers. Whoever lost their beret is gone for good. He's wearing the Airborne school patch, whatever, 509.
The flash, the 507.
507 flash,
Yes.
And it flew. That beret was never seen again. When people see that I'm in your podcast here and they see my name, I hope there's plenty of folks that say, he's a good dude.
Welcome to another episode of Teach Me to Fish, where our purpose is to help leaders better understand what drives people. In today's world, the core of recruiting and retaining talent revolves around leadership. And not just average leadership, but motivated, values-based, inspirational leadership. Our purpose is to get a little bit better every day. Progress equals small victories and stacking habits. Habits like getting up early, working your butt off, learning something new, being positive, and surrounding yourself with phenomenal people. Today's conversation is with Raphael Vasquez. Raphael is a career Army officer who enlisted in the Army, served as an NCO in 2nd Ranger Battalion before becoming an officer, and now currently teaches at the Army's Command and General Staff College. Raphael is a gifted storyteller with an amazing attention to detail, balanced with an infectious sense of humor and humility. I'm so happy to share with you Raphael's story, his advice for leaders, and his friendship. Raphael is the epitome of a good dude, and I'm excited to get this started. So without further ado, let's get to today's conversation with Raphael Vasquez.
Okay. I'm probably going to start off heavy, more than you expect, with my family's background. Probably you're going to learn stuff about me that you don't even know.
Yeah.
Great.
Raphael, you have more freaking stories. You got more stories than anybody I've ever met. You got a story for just about every situation. So the hardest thing is going to be getting you to, not share every single story, that you got. But it's going to be absolutely super easy, just like it was when we were on a run or when we go out, every time we've hung out for all these years. I wanted to do this with you for a while, and I've been thinking about it because of the impact that you've had on so many people out there in the Army. People that I've served with, people that have served with you. I want to share some of those stories with as many people that want to hear it, that are out there. I just want to kind of jump right into it and start talking about some of who you are. What do you want people to say about you when they hear your name and they think about you?
Well, two things, but I think the most important thing is the thing that you and I always talk about. It's sort of an inside joke, but when you're in a unit and somebody asks you, hey, do you know so-and-so? Yeah. And you have two ways to respond. You can either respond with, yeah, I know that dude, and that's it, which the silence speaks volumes. Yep. Yeah, I serve with him.
I know him.
Yeah, I know him.
We're not close, but I know him.
Oh, I know him. Or, I know that person. He is a good dude.
He's a good dude.
And I think that's what, when people see that I'm in your podcast here and they see my name, I hope there's plenty of folks that say, he's a good dude.
I know Raphael. He's a good dude. Yeah. Anybody that's been out there for more than a minute that knows that, Raphael is a good dude. I wouldn't have him here. I wouldn't be sitting here with him today if you weren't an absolute good dude. Special part of my life. So tell us a little bit about, give us a quick 1-minute intro, who you are, what you kind of got, what are you kind of working on right now? What's that kind of that big spoiler alert? What are you spending most of your time thinking about about now?
Well, I am getting ready to retire. So this is after 30 years of service. I'll have 30 years, 4 months, and 25 days from the time I raised my right hand. And so that's taken up a lot of my time, but not in a way as I'm preparing my leave form or my transition. It's taking a lot of time because I'm trying to be very deliberate and dumping all this information, all this knowledge, all these 30 years of experience of an incredibly positive experience and given them to these new field grade officers or soon to be field grade officers. As I am a instructor at the Commanding General Staff College, the Department of Joint Interagency and Multinational Operations, the JMO. Yeah. And so that's what's taking a lot of my time. How do I deliver this on an unadulterated fashion, in an unedited fashion, with realism, but also in the positive way that the Army's given me all these opportunities. So that's what's really taking a lot of my mental energy. How am I concise? How am I complete? And how I provide a perspective for these field grade officers that are about to take on an incredible challenge as Iron Majors.
You, since the day I met you, like, you know, when you've been a Ranger, when you grew up in the Ranger Regiment, you know, you serve with other Rangers, like you instantly have something like a connection with somebody. So the day I met you, we immediately had a connection when we met in One Panther back those days. But the thing that was like the reading in between the lines, not just Ranger School, not just Rangers, not just the 82nd Army stuff, there was things about you that stood out. You were always professional, more professional than most. You were always more personable than everybody else. And you had obviously spent more time reflecting on who you are, where you came from. You were so confident in your values and the kind of person that you were. That was unflappable. And I noticed that from such a young age, you know, as we grow up. Can you talk about like how you've started off like your personal life versus your professional life? A little bit about that, how you've reflected after all these years?
Yeah. I want to start back before the Army. So I need to start way back and maybe, a little bit of education. I don't have Wikipedia up, so I may get some of these facts incorrect. So
never let facts get in the way of a great story.
These are, I'll try to be I won't, this won't be hyperbole, but this is the mythos of the Vasquez family. My name is hard to pronounce. I know your uncle's name is Raphael as well, but my name is not Raphael. It's Raphael. And growing up, my parents made sure that I knew how to pronounce it correctly. Raphael Vasquez. Because it was important for them to know that I knew who I was. And what I was an amalgamation of two cultures, right? So the immigrant story. So my mother and father are immigrants. I'm a first-generation Mexican-American. I'm an American. My dad, he didn't say it all the time, but if you asked him, he would say, I'm Mexican by birth and American by grace of God. And it was his way of saying that the opportunities in the U.S. are incredible.
Yeah.
And so a little bit about my father. There's something in 1942 when America went to war, when the U.S. went to war, Mexico also declared war against the Axis powers. In its support for the war, there was a fighter wing that went to fight in the Philippines. But more importantly, it was a diplomatic and economic approach to supporting the war. And one of the most visible signs of Mexico's support in World War II was something called the Bracero program. And brazos in Spanish means arms. And Bracero program was manual labor. So all these Mexicans came to the U.S. to provide the manual labor in the fields. All that farm work, all that field work that was happening, that wasn't being done by Rosie the Riveter in machine shops, was done by Mexican laborers. And so my dad was born in 1941. So he grew up on the stories of these braceros that would go back to Mexico and tell him about what all these opportunities were. So as a 15, 16-year-old, my dad lied because the program was still active. So in 1957, my dad came to the U.S. illegally because he told people he was 18 years old. And he fell in love with the U.S. And so when I think about my father, I think about how he heard all these stories and he thought he was going to make a better life for himself with all these opportunities. And I always think about the audacity he had to dream this thing that he had heard in stories. Incredible. And so like that is part of who I am, this dreamer that's going to just pick up, walk all the way to the American border and start working and work his butt off. My mother is similar, but a little bit different. I don't know if you're familiar with the state of Durango in Mexico, but the state of Durango is similar to, let's say, Colorado. It's the Rocky Mountains in Mexico. It's part of that Rocky Mountain chain. When she was 9 years old, This is a true story. She walked barefoot from Durango to Mexicali. That's about a 900-mile stretch. Barefoot, all the way to the Mexican border, because there was an opportunity in Mexico for her and my grandmother. My mother is one of the hardest people you'll ever meet. Hard, tough as nails. It's the counterbalance to my dad. My mom is not a dreamer. She's about hard work, just getting it done. And so that's who I am. That's where I come from. A place of anything is possible in the world, and juxtaposed with, yeah, but you got to put the work in.
Yeah.
And so that's who I am as a person, not Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez. That's Raphael Vasquez. Work hard, dream big, and you can make it happen.
Man. Yeah, you know, that's how you grew up, your mom and your dad. How long before you started thinking about, like, the Army?
I didn't know anything about the Army. My father, when he was a young man and came to the U.S., he actually went to a recruiter because he thought service in the military was compulsory like it was in Mexico. But other than that story that he told when I was a young man, I didn't know anything about it. You know, quite honestly, I am one of 7, and we were of modest means. I don't say poor because we never were starving or anything like that, but we were of modest means. But I had 2 older sisters and an older brother in college at the time, and I was never a sports kid. I was in the band because my parents couldn't afford those physicals, the physicals to be in a sport. And since I was number 6 of 7, and
where did you guys live?
At that time, I was born and raised in Los Angeles, California. My brother suffered a significant car accident when he was 18 years old, and we ended up moving to Yuma, Arizona, so that he could recuperate.
Okay.
So I was in high school in Arizona, and so I was in the band. And
you were
so
in the band.
I was in the band. I played the saxophone.
And how did you? I mean, I'm sitting here, for those of you who can't see, I'm sitting here staring at every single photo of Raphael as a young soldier. You know, there's him in the newspaper. Here's him in the Rangers. But off to his right shoulder is a photo of him and his recruiter.
Yeah.
You know, so talk to us about your recruiter and how that came to be.
You know,
the Army.
I'll try to tie this to a theme that I think is super important. You got to bloom where you're planted, and you got to take every opportunity and make the best of it. Manuel Sanchez was a United States Army recruiter for my high school, Yuma, Arizona. He was the first dude with that last name Sanchez that I saw wearing a military uniform. And one day he just walked up to me, and I think he was a good recruiter. He'd done his homework. And he came up to me and goes, "Hey, what are you doing, man? You got good grades. You haven't taken your SATs. You haven't taken your ACTs. What are you doing? What's your plan? You think you want to go work in the lettuce fields like your parents because they don't have an education? You have an education." And he started talking to me real.
Yeah.
And he was like a role model. I was like, wait, I could be you? And his background was a little bit similar. And so he says, he didn't even ask me. He said, "You're getting out of English class tomorrow. You're going to come with me." And so I just did what I was told, like any good soldier. Right place, right time, right uniform. He said, "I'll pick you up tomorrow. You're not going to English class, and you're going to come with me." And he showed me a different path. Not a different way, not a hard way, just a different way, a different opportunity. That was the Army. So I just did it. It was the first time where I actually had an idea of what I was going to do after high school. So I was a really good student.
Yeah.
Chubby. And so Manuel Sanchez took me to the recruiting station, and I didn't follow his advice. He told me to become an MI soldier or MP because he wanted me to be close to my family. He knew how the family connection was. And I walked in and I said, "Airborne Ranger, sure, I'll take it."
What year was this?
1990. October 31st, Halloween 1990. I walk into MEPS. The career counselor's there. He's like, "Hey, so I hear you want to be MI or MP. We got this thing called Airborne Ranger." And I said, "Give me 2 scoops. I'll take that." And
how'd you learn about the Rangers?
There was a guy walking by. He looked cool, and I just says, "I can do that if he can do it."
He was in his uniform?
I had no idea.
Yeah.
And I asked a silly question. I said, "Do they jump out of planes?" And he goes, "Yeah, you'll be jumping every day." And he didn't lie to me because we jumped a lot. So it was an accident, but it was a fortuitous accident. It was serendipitous, man. Right. I just knew I wanted something different.
Sure.
I think I wanted to make my own way like my dad. I didn't necessarily want to stay in Yuma, Arizona, near my family, because Fort Huachuca is in Sierra Vista, a couple hours away from Yuma. And I think that's why the recruiter felt that would be a good fit. That might be what
you want to do.
Yeah. But like my dad, I wanted to go out on my own. I wanted to just dream big.
Yeah.
And so
I recently listened to a poem, and you can read the poem too, and I'll butcher it. But the point of it is, like, when you find yourself in the forest and you don't know where the path is, you just stop where you're at and you let the forest find you. You let the trees find you. And sometimes when you're not exactly sure what it is in life that you're looking for, you just kind of walk through the forest, you stop where you're at, and sometimes it finds you. I didn't know what I was looking for. Yeah. I did not know what I was getting myself into when I signed up for the Rangers. So you talk to us about the next step,
Well,
off you go to basic or something.
The next step is, before that day that I signed my contract to be an Airborne Ranger, I had been talking to Manuel Sanchez, Staff Sergeant Sanchez, but the person I was seeing was Manuel Sanchez. When I came out of that map station and I told him that I signed a Ranger contract for the first time in my life, I met Staff Sergeant Sanchez, non-commissioned officer. I told you what you were going to do. We had agreed upon. We made a decision, and now you backed up on it. So he wasn't so much mad as more he was upset that I didn't follow the direction, the plan that we were given.
Yeah.
And so I was like, whoa, wait a minute. Now I know what I'm getting myself into, which was a great thing for me because I was like, oh, I can do this. Because no matter how upset Staff Sergeant Sanchez got at me, no matter what he told me on the 3-hour drive back from San Diego MEPS to Yuma, Arizona, I was like, oh, this guy has nothing on my dad and mom. And so what I was envisioning was a drill sergeant.
Yeah.
Staff sergeant. I didn't know the difference, right? Because I was still being inculcated. Yeah.
So there was no social media.
Yeah,
there was no internet.
nothing.
There was no Google.
Nothing.
You didn't get to see all these things.
But I found out right away that this was serious, that I had put my name on a piece of paper and now I had a commitment and I was going to accomplish this and I was going to fulfill my commitment. And then I saw the caliber of NCO he was. He immediately switched. He knew when he needed to be Manuel and he knew when he needed to be Staff Sergeant Sanchez. And for the rest of the time until I joined the Army, which was May of the following year, he picked me up. We did PT. I was still chubby, but I was in shape. I knew I could pass the APFT.
Yes.
He did all those things that you're supposed to do with what we call, spoiler alert, I was a battalion commander for recruiting battalion.
The same one that you...
Well, not the same one, but...
I'm staring at your recruiting in, Salt Lake City recruiting battalion.
Yeah.
Plaque right here.
And in retrospect, your life comes together in such a way that I think that planted the seed of knowing that I wanted to be a battalion commander and that I wanted to command a recruiting battalion. It was those interactions with Staff Sergeant Sanchez that I think led me there. At the time, not immediately, but in retrospect, those were the seeds that were being planted for my future.
I want to hit on something you said about a minute ago. Mm-hmm. You said he was picking you up and he was taking you to do PT. He was getting you in shape. He was getting you ready. The Army now has a program called the Future Soldier Prep Force, where we take people and we send them to Fort Moore. We send them to Fort Jackson. But your recruiter was doing the Future Soldiers Prep course in 1990. That's what our recruiters were doing. My recruiter did the same thing with me. He picked me up. We went for a few runs. We went and did some push-ups. We went and did PT, and he kind of got me mentally prepared. And then other people needed a lot more preparation than maybe I did, and they got the attention. I just thought that was important.
I just think
that's important, because that's a program that is starting to gain some traction, and we're starting to see that it's working. I think if we look back at a lot of the things that have worked for us in the past, similar things will work going forward. So you showed up to basic training. Do you think you were more prepared?
Yeah, I was. I still didn't know things because, I was moving to the South, East Coast culturally. I ate tortillas with every meal. Now I'm eating...
Where'd you go to basic?
Fort Benning at the time.
Fort Benning.
Fort Moore now.
Sand Hill.
Yeah, but it was the first time I'd seen biscuits and gravy. What is this?
Yeah.
I never had this.
Yeah.
I'm used to tortillas and beans. So that was new. But physically, I was prepared. I wasn't scared. I wasn't terrified. It was exciting. I always think back to my dad, how he must have felt leaving, this country and coming to a completely different state. And knowing that story, I was like, my dad didn't even speak the language.
Yeah.
And he came and did it. And I'm going to Georgia. I'm going to be all right.
I'm going to be okay.
I'm going to be okay.
Yeah, I'm going to be fed. I got a place to sleep.
My mom walked barefoot oh, this rucksack weighs 19 pounds or 35 pounds.
And you're not going to turn around and call them on the phone and complain to mom and dad.
No, yeah, so that was easy. Yeah.
About how tough basic is.
I would like to clarify one thing, though. The Future Soldier Program is an existing structure. Future Soldier Prep Course is the new thing. Mm-hmm. And I think that is both academic and physical, where the Future Soldier Program was more to make sure that once a person enlisted, they wouldn't not ship.
Yeah.
So
you had to keep them mentally prepared.
Yeah, you had to keep them mentally prepared. And
so
what
Brady's
he was doing,
recruiter did that with him in Hawaii.
Yeah. So what he was doing was exactly what you're supposed to do as a recruiter. You find somebody, you make sure they're interested, you provide them an opportunity, and then you make sure they ship, because that's what the Army's asking him to do. That's his mission.
Yeah. I'm gonna want to save that for a little bit later when you give us some advice on like recruiting and retention.
100%.
But I think you are absolutely giving us advice just by telling us your story on how to recruit people, how to retain people, how to pick the right people. You know, how to get the right people with the right values who might not be the most physically fit, who might not be the most educated at the moment, but there's something inside of them, right, that is going to make them a very, very successful soldier. So I want to hear the story, no matter how similar or no matter how many times I've heard it. I want to hear about going to airborne school and then heading over to RIP.
Yeah, so... You know, it sounds, you've heard this.
But tell it your way. Tell it like only Raphael can tell it.
Look, it was easy for me. Right place, right time, right uniform. Just do it. And so for me, I'm in basic training. The first time I ran my 2-mile PT test was over 18 minutes. I finished basic training running in 11:30.
Wow.
So it was all about the hard work. Just execute it. I didn't question it. You know, when I was there, I remember early on, and this is something that echoed a couple of times. It's easy to complain, right? People are complaining around you, and I don't know if you want to be cool or you just want to be peer pressure. And I had a non-commissioned officer. He wasn't a drill sergeant. I think we were on the detail, the laundry detail every 2 weeks. You got to take your laundry in to get washed, and you get new laundry in basic training. And I think he saw that I was about to complain, and he looked at me and he said, "Hey, before you complain about hire or anybody else, make sure your stuff's squared away. Once your stuff is squared away, and nobody can come and reproach you for something you're doing wrong, then you can go one level higher and complain."
I love it.
And it stuck with me. So then I just put my head down and did what I was told. I tried to do the best in everything I could. And it was some of the best. I think at the time it was 15 weeks or 17 weeks was basic training. I didn't know that AIT was going to be in the same place. So I was excited. For
you get to say. I think you get your blue cord and then they do, or no, you don't get your blue cord till after AIT. Yeah. But like in the middle was like family week, right?
Yeah.
Or family day. Yeah. And then it was like the very next day was like back to work, same place.
Yeah, same place. I remember silly stuff that made me laugh. Like when we graduated basic and we started AIT, which was in the same barracks, same dorm room, same, starship at Fort Benning at the time. Same drill sergeants. The drill sergeant said, "Okay, gentlemen, back to day zero. You all remember day zero."
Oh,
so it was like, okay, so we're going to do day zero all over again. So, but it was an exciting time for me. I learned all about biscuits and gravy. I learned all about all those different grits, I had never eaten them before. And I had a great time. I was in some of the best shape of my life. And then, basic airborne school was pretty easy at the time. I was running on the weekends, because I was 17. I couldn't go out and get in trouble, so I stayed in the barracks. I went to the gym. Yeah. I did PT. I know it sounds maybe silly, but I was having a great time. I was on my own as a 17, 18-year-old kid for the first time. And, Fort Benning was my playground. I ran every day around the towers. I was in incredible, incredible shape.
Yeah.
And then graduation for airborne school started. And I remember standing in formation and all these people are sitting around waiting for something. And I didn't know what that was. But what it was is us, the Rippies. And out of nowhere, out of the corner of my eye, this black beret, at the time we had black berets, just shot up in front of me. And it was the scariest thing I've ever encountered. It was the first time I was terrified in the Army. This dude was chiseled. I don't remember his name, to be honest with you. But he said, "Gentlemen, I'm going to count to 5. And your bags better be in that deuce and a half." And so I think at 3, there was like 15 or 20 of us. All our bags were a deuce and a half. The deuce and a half took off, and we were running behind it to get to RIP, which was on the other side of post.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait a minute, everybody else is celebrating. Everybody's having a good time. Airborne Ranger, yeah. The family's there. And here we are.
Running up the hill.
First of all, some of us were not smart enough not to be wearing, not me, but some of us were wearing our airborne berets because we had just graduated.
The red beret. Yeah, your maroon beret.
And my man shows up with a black beret and he launched it. Like launched it. That dude never recovers. Whoever lost their beret is gone for good. He's wearing the Airborne School patch, whatever, 509.
The flash, the 507.
507 flash,
Yes.
And it flew. That beret was never seen again. And we put our bags in there, and it was a different world. It was a different world. And you want to talk about adversity, I can talk about RIP.
Yeah. Yeah, well, when we get into RIP, like everybody's story is like the things that they remember, the things that they blacked out for, the things that like kind of go by, in my case, the people that I remember, like Jeff Struker being my RIP instructor, like I remember him every single day, like, also because I served with him like after that, as well. But like you get up there, you get inside that fence, and what do you remember the most about those few weeks in RIP?
I remember not being able to swim. I recycled. I went to RIP 5 times. I was there for about 6 months. And I don't know how many times I've shared this story before, but right before I graduated, we went on senior ditch day. And I had a really good friend of mine drown in front of me. And it kind of messed with my head and stuff. But, long story short, it manifested itself when I was at RIP, and we got in that cold pool at Harmony Church or wherever we did the ACA.
That was probably December?
Yeah, it was by then. Probably November. Yeah, it was pretty cold, and you're out there, and I think it was Harmony Church at the time where they had the pool. And that whole cold water shocks you, and you're jumping with all your kit trying to make that swim, and it just kind of messed with me, And, I was going to get recycled, and I remember being brought into the office, and the staff sergeant there, the training room NCO says, "Hey, you're going to Korea." And I was like, "Why?" I said, "Why am I going to Korea?" He's like, "Oh, because you didn't pass the Ranger swim test, the combat water survival test."
Yeah.
I was like, "Yeah, but I didn't quit. I just can't swim. But that you have to say you quit." So he's like, "Oh, okay, get back in formation." And so he put me back in formation. Like I wasn't quitting. I didn't quit. And so every single day that I had, I would go on detail every morning. And do you remember the pre-ranger school out in Coal Range? The pre-ranger course out in Coal Range?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So when you're a holdover at RIP, you have a couple of options. You can go on a bunch of details, and because you're just extra manpower waiting for another class to begin. So I always volunteered for Coal Range. I always volunteered, which what it meant is that you're a private. I was still I didn't even have mosquito wings, so I was an E1 still. I was an E1, and I would go out to Coal Range, and I would set up the targets. I would set up all these things that would serve my chow and get smoked by the pre-ranger instructors, while rangers who are coming back from the battalions are getting ready to go to ranger school, right? So you got these guys that are coming for 1st, 2nd, 3rd Ranger Battalion to going to Coal Range, and they're getting smoked to prepare for Ranger School. I'm a rippy getting ready to go to RIP before I even get to battalion, volunteering because I wanted to learn as much as I could. So I took copious notes. I mean, I took as many notes as I could. I got super strong doing a lot of push-ups, and I did that until I passed the swim test. And so 5 classes later, I passed the swim test, got to Ranger School, and for my troubles, I got to go to Ranger School 6 months after I got to battalion.
Yeah, so you showed up to 275, and 6 months later you were going to Ranger School.
I was going to Ranger School. I was ready.
You had spent more time at Cole Range than any of the
I knew that Ranger handbook in and out. I didn't waste any time. At Cole Range, I was taking notes. I was watching what they were doing. I didn't know half of the stuff that they were saying, but I took notes, and so it would jar my memory. And I got to 275 in January of 1992. Yeah, because I shipped in May of 98. So I got January 92, and in June of 1992, I was in Ranger School. I was back at Cole Range, getting ready to go to Ranger School.
Back at Cole Range. Hey, so you just threw out a year, 92, right? And you're getting ready to go to Ranger School. Everybody from my generation, our generation, we remember where we were at 9/11. Do you remember, like, what was when Mogadishu went down? Do you remember, like, what was happening during those times? You're in 275, but when you heard what happened with 375, Black Hawk Down, Mogadishu. How did you hear about it, and what were you being told?
Well, at this point, I mean, there's nothing secret or unclassified or classified about it, but we were actually training in Fort Bliss. So our battalion was down in Fort Bliss doing some training, which now in retrospect, it's clearly what we were doing. We were preparing for operations.
Yeah.
And if I remember correctly, we were the RRF-1 battalion. So we were the Ready Force 1 battalion. We were supposed to be the ones that got called if we went. The problem with the Left Coast Battalion, as the 2nd Ranger Battalion is called, logistically, it makes more sense because 1st and 3rd are right next to the headquarters. So if something pops, you can get on a plane and be gone right away.
Yeah.
Where McCord is so far away, and it's not like today where everything's super fast.
Yeah.
It would take some time.
And General Hotel on Legends of the 75th podcast, I recently listened to that again, and what he said was it's kind of simple. Like, why do they keep picking 375 for a lot of these things? Because you can walk outside, you can do face-to-face coordinations,
Correct.
You can prepare, you can rehearse, you can coordinate these things together, and so there's a reason with having them so close. It just makes more sense in those crisis situations to prepare in that way.
What you're describing is commander's dialogue, and that's another thing we can get into, how important commander's dialogue is. It's incredibly important. You know, having commanded a battalion and you as well, that dialogue is incredibly important. And no matter how much technology we have around us, this people business that the Army is in is super important to have that type of dialogue. We were down in Bliss doing some stuff, and we actually had senior leaders quit. And when I say senior leaders, I was a private at the time, or an E4, tab D4. So I had come back with my Ranger tab. I was a 50 cal machine gunner in one of when we first had gotten the Land Rover Defender vehicles.
Jeeps and bikes.
Yeah. And so we had some folks quit because we were the RF-1 battalion. And, you know, at that time, you know, we're training for war, we're training for the big game, and then the big game happens and you don't go. And so we had some folks quit.
And by the big game, you meant 375 a company got picked to go to Mogadishu.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So exactly. It was known that only a small element got picked to go.
Yeah, and then by the time all that went down, you know, there was 275 wasn't going to go.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Did you see on TV? Did you see any of the videos? And how did it make you feel?
Well, I think it's a little different now, you know, because it wasn't that accessible. But I'll tell you a personal story. When I was in RIP, I had a really good friend of mine. He lost his leg in Mogadishu, and we were Rippies together. And so I didn't know he had lost his leg until I went back. You mentioned Strucker.
Yeah.
I did Best Ranger with Strucker in 1994. And I was getting ready for Best Ranger, and I went over to 375 and I talked to him, and he took off his leg, and I was like, whoa. And that was the first time I had seen it personally, because, you know, 2nd Ranger Battalion is on the West Coast. Mm-hmm. So even though we interact during Ranger rendezvous and stuff like that, it was a different battalion. It was a different world if you're on the West Coast than if you're on the East Coast. And so, you know, it was the first time that I physically saw, you know, knowing the hazards of my chosen profession, what that could mean.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I totally remember, like, the difference between 375 and how strapped they always looked, and their uniform was always perfect. And then 1st Battalion, you know, the beach guys, you know, always had a little bit better of a tan, always, you know, upper bodies were always big, tiny little legs,
Yeah.
right? And then the 275 guys, I always remember like at pre-Ranger and as you'd see them, and they always had their hat kicked back a little bit more.
Always.
And they always had like that K&W PC with the thick brim.
And it's hanging right here.
Yeah. Yeah, there it is. And it's like that thick brim kicked back a little bit. PC, and so you always felt like just by the way that they wore their uniform, you feel like you could, in the way they looked and stood, you're like, I can tell which battalion they were from.
It's funny, the personalities are one thing, but logistics are another. I remember all those deployments, how we were doing 100-day deployments, 90-day deployments during the global war on terrorism, and you would come in and it would be 1st Ranger Battalion, 2nd Ranger Battalion, 3rd Ranger Battalion. And I know 3rd Ranger Battalion loved coming behind us because we were from Seattle, so we always had Starbucks. And 1st Ranger Battalion always left us with Folgers.
Yeah.
Or Dunkin'. I know you like Dunkin', but
Dunkies.
Dunkin' Donuts. We came in with, the real stuff.
The Starbucks.
The Starbucks coffee,
Yeah. What year was your first deployment?
2004.
2004.
2004.
And what rank were you at the time?
I was a platoon leader. And here's a platoon right here, as a matter of fact. I was a platoon leader in Bravo Company in 275. But Matt, I spent 7 years, and I was a black sheep. I spent 7 years in 2nd Ranger Battalion Alpha Company.
Yeah.
That's Tillman's platoon.
Yeah. So that means there's 7 years between from you getting back from Ranger School in preparation before your first deployment as a lieutenant. So there's a lot of stuff in between there. Yeah. Why did you go from being an NCO in the Ranger Battalion? What made you want to go become an officer?
Do you remember, you mentioned 1992, and why 1992 is important is because 1992 was the inaugural Hall of Fame class for the Ranger Hall of Fame. That was the first year. And it was the first time I had heard the name Richard Cavazos. Fort Cavazos?
Yes.
And so Richard Cavazos was born in Texas from Mexican-American parents. But for me, as a brand new minted Ranger tabbed specialist, it was the first time I had heard a Hispanic sounding name tied to general. It's the first time.
Yeah.
Maybe there were, but it was the first time I was hearing it. And again, I was talking about planting seeds, and then you something sticks in your mind and you're not really knowing where it would go. And I remember, wow, so this is a possibility. I didn't know this. I didn't know that you don't see a lot of officers, senior, that sound like me, that look like me, that have a very similar background, because his background, he was born in 29, I think. So I did some research on him, and I read about him. And so it had always stuck in the back of my mind. But, I got out of the Army after 7 years. One of the last assignments I did was a primary leadership development course. That's how old I am, PLDC.
PLDC.
Yeah.
I went to PLDC at Fort Stewart, Georgia. ID.
So I was an instructor, and I loved it. I found that
So you left the Ranger Battalion.
It was my last year.
And then as a sergeant. Staff sergeant.
Yes.
And then you went over and taught PLDC.
Right. So
at Fort Lewis.
Yeah, it was an opportunity, right? So my sergeant major came to me and said, hey, look, Raphael, we send a lot of NCOs, a lot of specialists to PLDC, and they're under strength. So I'm good friends with the commandant. I know you're getting ready to get out of the Army. How about you go over there, take the time you need. Look, TAP wasn't what it is now, right? The Army transition program was not as bad as Vietnam, but you were in the Army one day, and then the next day, you got to remember not to go 15 September 2024, right? You got to remember how to write the date correctly. And so he says to me, hey, why don't you go over there, and it'd be doing him a personal favor. And, again, Army business.
Yeah. He's
a senior non-commissioned officer. You're doing me a solid because I know the commandant over there, and we're doing him a solid. And I jumped on the opportunity. So here I am now, my last year, instructing. It's a mirror of what's happening now, right? So my last year as a non-commissioned officer, I was dumping all that knowledge into this brand new group
of
E4s about to be sergeants. And I was giving them every bit of knowledge, everything I could. And that was my focus, because I didn't know that I was going to come back in the Army. But Matt, why that's important is because this all goes back to Abrams' charter. Yeah. For those of you that are listening, right? if you don't know Abrams Charter, even though he said, hey, we're going to start this 1st and 2nd Ranger Battalion, and it's going to be apparent they're the best, the most disciplined, the best of the best of the best of the best of the best because of what they do and how they do it. There was an underlying message in his charter, and the charter is, and those who serve in these battalions will then go back to the rest of the Army and make it better by being more disciplined, by being role models. And I took that part of the charter seriously, and I always have.
Yeah.
And it goes back to my upbringing. My parents said, hey, make it better. The Army's leadership, the definition of leadership, purpose, direction, motivation, all that stuff. What makes us different, there's a part in it that also says to make the organization better. No other leadership organizations have that last bit of it.
Yeah.
We do. And I've always taken that seriously. So when I went there, I just wanted to give them everything I had. Here it is. Take it, use it. Don't use what you don't want, but leave the place in a much better condition than how you found it. And that's where I'm at now.
Yeah. It's amazing how, that's how you were pouring it in as an NCO, and now you're doing the same thing as an officer, as you finish things up, pouring everything you can into it. I want to talk about what brought you back in the Army? What made you go to do ROTC, if that's what you did, and brought you back in?
I did do it. I think it's important that I'm 100% honest with you.
I'd kick your ass if you
Of course.
Because I can still kick your ass.
So I got out of the Army in 1998. I was a young man when I got married. I was married when I was enlisted before. I was a young man. And my ex-wife and I, we were just young, and didn't have the proper, relationship, anger management techniques, conflict resolution. We were both young, right?
Yeah.
So at the 7-year mark, our marriage culminated. And that was around the time I was getting out of the Army. And so I moved back home with my parents. Funny story about my mother. She's like, hey, move back with us, And I was like, nah, Mom. She goes, well, you think I'm going to crap your style? That's what hotels are for, dude. Move back is to save your money, get a down payment for a home, pay for education. You're not getting an apartment. And so as a 27, 25-year-old, I moved back in with my parents. Some of the best times I had, because it was now me and my mom and dad just by myself.
Yeah.
And now my dad has treated me as an equal, not as a child, because I had grown up. And it was some of the best time. And I really cherish those moments, because I spent about 2 years with them, just me and them at their house. And it was a fantastic time. And so the reason I moved back in with them is because I went to community college. So I started Arizona Western College, this really small community college in Arizona, using my GI Bill. And then when I culminated that, which was super easy, I did an associate's in less than a year, because you learn the discipline and time management in the Army, right? So I go to Arizona State University, and one day I'm walking out of class, I was a math major. I know it's hard to believe.
No, it's not. I know you.
I was a math major, and I was walking out of class, and out of this building, there's a bunch of young ladies walking out. I'm like, what is that building? So I go over there, and it's the psych department. So that day, I changed my major to psychology. So now I'm taking all these psychology classes. And again, it's fortuitous or opportunity. That psychology building one was right next to the ROTC building. And I didn't know the ROTC building was there. So I'm walking out of psychology one day. This fat captain is walking out of the ROTC building, and I go start making fun of him. I'm like, hey, what happened to 600-9? I guess the AR must have changed. What's up with the height and weight standards? And he's like, and I'm like, hey, bro, come on, man. Set the example. Yeah, set the example. So this is prior to 9/11, right? So yeah. I'm busting his chops. And he goes, hey, man, give me a break. I was in 101st, and I fell off. I felt rappelling, and I broke my back. And I say to him, eat less. And so this went on for like 10 minutes of me just giving him crap. And long story short, I joined ROTC that afternoon. Yeah. I realized how much I missed the Army.
Yeah.
At that time, I didn't have an intention, but I was like, you know what?
The Ranger in you came out
The Ranger
quick.
came out immediately. And it was in the form of standards and discipline and rules and making sure you're doing the right thing. Because I'm a civilian now. That's right. Yeah. I'm a civilian. I'm like, hey, bro, you're setting an example for these young officers who are going to set the example for non-commissioned officers. And that day, I'm like, I can't have this.
Yeah.
I can't have this. So I joined the Army.
So you started taking ROTC?
That afternoon, I was enrolled in ROTC.
How many years did you do
I was
college
about,
ROTC?
I was about, probably about 2.5 years.
2.5 years.
And that's where I met my wife, Nicole. She was also a cadet.
Yeah.
You know, she was a cadet there, and she commissioned logistics officer. And so, yeah.
And then you commissioned as a...
I commissioned as an infantry officer. I got my number one choice, infantry, MI, branch detailed infantry. So I ended up in MI, which is what I am now after my detail. But yeah.
And that was 03?
So that would have been in 02.
02.
That would have been 2002. 2001 or 2000.
Then you went off back to Benning.
I went back to Fort Benning at the time, and I made the commandant list at IOBC.
Go figure, Ranger, Jump Master, you know.
You know, but the thing is, it was the same story. You know, it's about perspective. I remember sitting in those, you know, you're sitting there in that big field at OBC cleaning your weapons for 8 hours, and dudes are complaining. They're like, hey, how long are we going to clean our weapons? I'm like, gentlemen, we're getting paid right now. Taxpayers are paying us to ensure that these weapons are the cleanest weapons ever seen. Clean your weapon. Choose to clean your weapon. Don't complain because you have to clean your weapon. You know, so it was, and so that one of my fellow OBC students works here with me at the JMO.
Wow.
Yeah, and he goes, "Hey man, what's up?" And we started talking, and I remember him telling me, he goes, "You know, I remember clearly this about you," because I was a senior guy at OBC. Because I remember one day you got up in front of the whole class and said, "Gentlemen, stop talking about Ranger School. I have a tab and I'm terrified of going to school right now." Because they had been building it up in their head so much.
Yeah.
And I was like, stop worrying about it. Worry about what's in front of you right now.
Yeah.
You know, which is weapons maintenance, which is, you know, the class we got tomorrow, which is going to the range tomorrow. You're going to go to Ranger School and do what you're told. But he remembers that. And he told me, he goes, you know, it's something I've used for now going on his 25 years of service.
Worry about what's in front of you right now.
Worry about what's in front of you right now.
And do it as your best of your ability.
And this is a fellow lieutenant colonel telling me, and that's the thing, Matt, you know, all these nuggets and stuff, you never know when somebody's going to latch onto that. And that becomes your legacy. And you hear it years later, repeat it back to you, and you go like, wait, I said that.
Yeah.
You know?
Or you heard something from somebody else that they thought was insignificant. They were just spitting out that thing, and you latched onto it, and it becomes your mantra. It becomes something that you live your life by.
And they're reaffirming moments, you know? Like, okay, I was doing something right at some point. And I think, I'm self-deprecating. That's my style. But, I think.
When you talk about like you get back in these big groups, and then as soon as you get in these big groups, people tend to whine, people tend to complain. There's a lot of, when you get into these mass groups, like everybody just wants to fit in. Nobody wants to be the person that, that says these things. But everybody wants to just fit in. But the people that we look up to the most are the ones that stand out. It's the ones that stand out and are different than everybody else.
Yeah, and they're different because they're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
The thing is, my parents always said it, you can't be wrong if you're doing the right thing. Do the right thing and don't have to worry about anything else. So I think if you do that and take care of this stuff, another really senior NCO who was, he was in the unit, he was the sergeant major at the place there in Bragg.
Yeah.
And, or Fort Liberty now. He was one of my first team leaders, and he always used to say it all the time. And this is back in like 92, man. He used to say, you take care of the small things, the big things will take care of themselves.
Yeah.
Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And he said it all the time.
Yeah.
And yeah, take care of the little stuff. So you take care of the little stuff, the stuff that you can control, and the big stuff will take care of itself. And don't be in such a rush to fail.
I feel like as people get older, as people mature, as people get more experience, the things get simpler, easy to describe, easier to understand. Keep it simple. It's hard for people to understand, because it can't be that easy. Like it can't be just like focus on be in the right place at the right time in the right uniform. But then after years, you realize maybe it can be that easy. Do what you're told. Matt,
I because you know me, this won't surprise you. When we sat down and talked about having this interview, I prepared my notes, just like you do with anything else.
Yeah.
Just to be prepared. I want to put my best foot forward. And one of the things that I wrote down was that sometimes you have to go to this mandatory training stuff, and you're like, oh, I got to go to mandatory training. But I don't see it that way. I always try to take something out of it. I recently had to go to mandatory resiliency training. And the person that spoke to us about performance. And I think I may have told you this before, but he was talking about, there's this thing that you have innate to you. That's your ability, right? That's nature. You're either good at something, you're not good at something, you're personable, you're not personable. It's something that's part of you, right? And then there's this other thing that's we can call it nurture, right? That's training. You get a bunch of reps and sets, and you get better at that skill, and you get better and better and better. And then there's this last thing that gets in the way, these obstacles, right? And that's self-doubt. That's worrying about things. But if you prepare, like I did before this, some of that goes away. And so I think when you're a young officer or a young soldier, you're worried about all this other stuff instead of just preparing what your piece of the pie is. And so some advice that I would give folks that are coming into this business or even into a new position, because it happens when you go from lieutenant to captain to major to colonel, lieutenant colonel to 06 colonel, right? Yeah. It happens at every stage. But one of the things you can do is anchor yourself on all those things you know. And what do you know? We know doctrine. So refamiliarize yourself with doctrine, because now you read it through a different lens, right? So you read it through and by the way, I am at the Combined Arms Center, so I have to throw a pitch for doctrine. That's in my contract.
Right. Need it.
I say that in jest, but in reality, if you look at doctrine now at your level, you see that doctrine through a different lens. You don't see it with lieutenant eyes. You see it with colonel eyes. Yeah. And you go, oh, wait a minute. Then you familiarize yourself with the regulations or policies of that unit. What are your left and right limits? Okay, now as I'm applying doctrine, I have left and right legal limits, so reread it. Familiarize yourself with that. Well, okay, now as a colonel, what are my left and right? Because they're different than when I was a lieutenant. Yeah. My left and right limits as a lieutenant were very narrow, maybe 10 or 15 degrees compared to, 80 degrees span as a colonel. Right. And then, just apply that common sense, that logic, and then do it as hard and as fast as you can. What is your commander telling you must do? That's you now. That's your creativity. Now you know doctrine. Now you know the policies, and you know your commander's guidance. Now you add your creativity. But don't reinvent the wheel. Yeah. Somebody already laid out for you.
Amen. Somebody already showed us how to do it. Somebody's already figured out the best way. You can tweak it a little bit around on the margins, but do exactly what. I like the way you articulated that with transitions and how there's certain things that you do at each transition when you become a company commander, when company commander becomes a field grade, when field grade becomes a battalion commander. Yeah. You come back to these schools, you come back to PME, you surround yourself with people and you say, all right, what are you thinking about? What am I missing? What am I forgetting? So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm here at PCC, sitting over here at CGSC in the evening. Instead of heading home back to the hotel, I'm staring at all your plaques. I'm looking at Rangers. I'm looking at HHC, First of the 505th, One Panther, Ranger stuff everywhere. I feel like I'm in a museum. I see a gimlet stick over here on my right. I'm just soaking it all up. Prodigal Soldiers sitting on your desk,
Look at this.
G.I. Joe's books everywhere.
This would interest you as well.
The Beautiful Country and the Middle Kingdom. I haven't read that one.
Oh, it's an incredible book about Chinese relationship, U.S. and Chinese relationships going back to 1796.
Damn, give me that shit. All right. So, I'm staring at all these stuff, right? And I'm absorbing it. I'm soaking it up. Yeah. After 30 years, I'm trying to redo, get myself and my mind in the right place.
Sincerely, I want to do such a service to what you're trying to do here. And I want to be as genuine as I can, and I want to be as forthright as I can, the good and the bad. But overall, my Army experience has been such a positive one. Yeah. And I just want to give back. The Army gave me such an opportunity, incredible. When I look at my friends, my family, and the things that I have seen and experienced, my friends, my family, they're incredible people, great human beings. The difference is the experience that I've been exposed to. And I owe that to the Army. And so I just want to give back. I just want to be able to provide that.
Speaking of the transition piece, back to that, you were getting ready to make a transition. You're now an officer. You're getting ready, you're about to leave Fort Benning and you're going to head to your first organization, right? You talked about rebluing yourself on doctrine, getting yourself all right. Talk a little bit more about leaving Fort Benning and the transition and then out to your first unit.
Yeah, I think somebody told me once that, the first discriminator is physical fitness, right? Especially in the infantry. Because I don't know anything about you. I'm not talking about your physical appearance. I'm not talking about, your background. I'm just talking about your physical fitness. And so what I wanted to make sure when I first showed up to my first unit is that I was in the best shape of my life. And so there was no doubt when I showed up to my very first unit, there was nobody outrunning me. There was nobody out push-upping me. There was nobody out sit-upping me. I was a beast. And so that's what I did between my transition. I saw my family. I spent some time with my wife, because she was training in Fort Lee at the time. It was at Fort Lee at the time. And I was in Fort Benning. We didn't see each other a lot. But on the way to Fort Lewis, we both trained. She trained and I trained. And we were beasts. And that's what we did with our time. And I read FM 7-8. I quote at 7-8 because that was the manual that we were using at the time to ensure that I knew the language of my, mission, the doctrinal language. So I that's what I did.
Did you know you were going to 275 or
no? As a matter of, this is the craziest thing. I was supposed to go to 2ID. So what you need to understand for those that are paying attention right now, we were undergoing transformation at the time. It's called MDO now, and we're changing the army. But at the time, we were going through transformation, which meant that we were getting rid of the Humvees and the Bradleys and going to Strykers. And so there were two separate brigades at Fort Lewis, Washington, and that was 2nd ID. I forget, 1st Brigade, 2nd ID, I think. And then it was 3rd Brigade, 25th ID. So I was going to 25th ID, and 2nd Brigade was there. But my original orders were to 2nd ID. And I go to I-Corps, and at the time, we didn't have Velcro.
Yeah. You had your shit was sewn on.
Your stuff was sewn on. And if you were squared away like I was, you had your uniform pressed. But the backing of the patches had little like plasticky stuff.
That glue shit.
And they would ruin your uniform. Yeah. Ruin it.
The BUs.
Like if you were, like, I feel bad for the first cav folks because their patch was so enormous. Yeah. You're like, oh, that guy serving first cav, look, his uniform is awful. Because it had that sticky stuff on it. Yeah. So I go to I-Corps, I go to G1, and the guy, and I'm showing up there, and he was a colonel, 06 colonel, G1, and I don't know why he's assigning me, but that's the guy that talked to me. He goes, hey, you're going to go to 2nd ID, yada, yada. I said, hey, sir, I'm a lieutenant. There's a lot of us coming in. Can I go to 25th ID instead? And he goes, yeah, sure, absolutely. I see your prior service. Do you have a connection with the regiment? I'm like, no, not at all. He's like, oh, okay. So you don't want to be a gimlet? Why do you want to go to 25th ID instead of 2nd ID? I said, sir, that patch ruins a BDU. And he goes, are you serious? And yeah, that is why I went to 3-2-1.
Yeah.
I was going to execute my job no matter what. But if I had a choice, I want to go to 25th ID, which is, it sounds silly, but it's culturally, as a leader, you need to take those kind of things into account, because even that little tiny thing, that bit of hope that I had a decision in my future, in my day-to-day activity, gave me like this boost, right? Yeah. And you need that. That's, as a leader, you need to provide your subordinates with some semblance of control. So at the time, I didn't know how to articulate that, right? I'm doing it now because I've read enough and I pay attention and I've made a point of educating myself. Yep. But at the time, that colonel gave me a semblance of choice, and I excelled. Yeah. He could have said, no, you're going to where you're supposed to go, but he chose not to.
Because when you show up and you chose to go to the 25th, like, who do you got to blame if you don't like it? You picked this place.
Correct.
You said you could have went the other unit, but you chose this one. So mentally, he set you up for success by saying, you picked this place, man.
And this
Now go give it everything you got.
And this entire time, I thought that I was outsmarting him, but in retrospect, that was a good leader. That 06 was a good leader. He's like, you know what? In the grand scheme of things, I'm going to get 2 lieutenants. One has got to go to this unit. One has got to go to the other unit. Irrelevant. This one wants to go there. Let him go.
Yeah.
And it was perfect for me. I loved it. Had a great time. General Lubis was my company commander.
He was your company commander.
He was my company commander.
The 25th?
I still have his letter of recommendation to go to 2nd Ranger Battalion when I was a PL.
How many months did you serve as a PL in that unit?
I was there for 12 months.
12 months. Right there at Fort Lewis.
A funny story about how I ended up in Ranger Regiment.
Yeah.
Back in Ranger Regiment. Honestly, I didn't plan on it. I was a married Army couple, so my focus was to stay with my wife. If you go to Fort Lewis, there's an airfield right in the center of the post, and you run the airfield.
Yeah.
And one day I'm running. Do you know General McFarland?
Yes.
So I'm running the airfield, and he was Major McFarland at the time, who previously had been Lieutenant McFarland, my platoon leader.
When you were a sergeant.
When I was sergeant.
Yeah.
A funny story about that too, but we'll sidebar that. So I'm running the airfield with my platoon, and he's running around the opposite way, and he looks at me and goes, "Hey man, what are you doing?" Out of breath because we're running as fast as we can. He goes, "Oh, I'm doing PT with my platoon, sir." He's like, "Oh, awesome, you're a platoon sergeant?" He goes, he asked me if I was a platoon sergeant. I said, "No, sir, it's my platoon. I'm a platoon leader." He said, "Come see me this afternoon." He ran back to 275. I ran back to my platoon, did PT, and because a major told me to come see him that afternoon, I drove myself up to 275, which was on the other side of the post.
Yeah.
And he goes, "What are you doing? Stop wasting your time." And he was busy, so he goes, "What are you doing? Stop wasting your time." At the time he was a 3, he sent me to go talk to John P. McGee.
Yeah.
Who had been my XO when I was in E4. And General McGee goes, at the time Major McGee goes, "Put in your packet right now. As a matter of fact, let me call G1. Hey." And he calls Regimental G1, and I got a date. I'm like, "Sir, I haven't even put my pad together." He goes, "That's on you. You got a date."
You got a date.
So I put my packet together.
JP McGee was my company commander then before I went to Green and Gold when I was a sergeant.
But Matt, all I'm telling you this, I'm describing these like super great things that, but the reason that happened is because my reputation prior to that spoke volumes about what I could do, right? So we're talking about my potential.
The greatest indicator of your potential is your prior performance.
Correct. And they knew, back to the story of, "Oh, I know that guy," or "I served with that guy." They knew I was a good dude. Yeah. And so they went to bat immediately for me. Yeah. And within a couple minutes. Yeah.
So then you're back to you go to RASP 2?
Go to RASP 2. I smoked it, man. Yeah. I smoked it. I'm telling you, look, it's not about bragging, but what I have in front of my desk, why I talk about my physical fitness is because I want you to read the first bullet of my DA Form 1059 when I attended Primary Leadership Development Course, PLDC. I want you to read the first bullet.
Student failed the initial APFT conducted on 6 January 1993.
That is the first bullet. That first bullet on my military record, a stain on an other than exemplary career. And that was because I just didn't take it seriously. I did probably 100 push-ups. Yeah. But according to this, I didn't do them to standard. Yeah. And from then on, I made sure that I was going to do everything to standard. You
would control everything that you could possibly control.
Correct. And so at that time, I was a young, hot-headed specialist. Yeah. And I bowed up to the staff sergeant that was grading me before he even graded me. Yeah. And now he's grading me. Yep. And he's like, "Okay, I got it. You got to know your audience."
I got something for you.
He's got something for me.
I got something for you.
I'm not saying that he graded me improperly. I'm not saying that he took a vendetta on me. What I'm saying is that I did not pass the APFT. Yeah. And so from then on, I knew I was going to smoke it. And that's why this other picture is on my desk. That's me doing Best Ranger. Immediately after this, PLDC, within months, I signed up to do Best Ranger. That's where I met Struker. Yeah. And then I've been a beast ever since.
Yeah.
And so when I say I went to RASP and I smoked it. I was doing the 12-mile road march. I was doing 10, 30-minute miles, 10, 11-minute miles, 12-minute miles.
Yeah.
Like my splits were ridiculous. When I got done, the next guy came in about 45 minutes after me.
Damn.
You know me.
Yeah,
know?
I know. I know what you're capable of.
I'm a little slow now.
We're a couple days older, but
it'll hurt.
But I know it's in there.
Yeah, but I'm bragging a bit, right? But I'm saying that you can overcome anything. When I got this 1059, I thought my world was done. The sergeant major of the battalion brought me into his office, and he's like, "Why am I not going to RFS you right now? Why am I not going to relieve you for standards?"
Yeah. It says right there, the forwarding address, ACO 275.
Correct.
Fort Lewis, Washington. So they sent this to
3 days later, I smoked it. Look at the bottom. Right down, there's the little note that passed ACFT.
Passed.
3 days later.
3 days later.
Smoked it. You know what I mean? But I'm not bitter. I learned from there. Right?
Yeah.
So what I learned is that you carry those chips, but now, know your audience and be prepared and control everything you can control. And then everything else is just what it's going to be.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk about some of the deployments and some of the, some of those times you head off to Afghanistan, as a platoon leader. We all have different stories from the 04, 05, 06, 07 years. What are the ones that are the most memorable moments from those first few deployments?
Deployments were difficult for my wife and I because we were on different deployment cycles. So I would meet Nicole at the ramp of the, C-147 or, C-17 or whatever bird and be like, I love you so much, baby. I need the Leatherman. I need that plate carrier or that pouch, and I'll see you in a year. So they were very difficult. Like I told you, my daughter was 4 years old, and then when I came back, she's 14 years old or, something like that. I forget the ages, but so that was very, very hard. And that's just part of the sacrifice we make. My wife volunteered for her first deployment, and we laugh in retrospect. And she says, hey, I'm going to go ahead and deploy now so I can get it over with after 20 years of deployment, right? So that's how naive we were, how long this thing was going to last, because the superpower that we are.
Yeah.
Go in and out. It's going to be another Grenada, another Panama, another just cause. Anyway, so those are difficult. But again, I wouldn't give it up for the world. My experience has been great. But I do want to highlight two things. One, a not so good thing because, we lost some Rangers. And, if you think about one of the hardest things I had to do when I was a military intelligence officer was deal with this. I transitioned from infantry to intel in 275. So after I got done with my platoon leader time, my battalion commander asked me if I wanted to stay and be an AS2. I said, absolutely. Another opportunity to spend another year, 2 years with Rangers? Absolutely. And so there was a running joke between the squad leaders and me that they're like, sir, you were a platoon leader 2 days ago. Now you're an intel officer. Where's your magic 8-ball? So we used to joke about it all the time. And as luck would have it, at the time, I was attached to a joint group. We had all the different tier organizations that we were working with. Yep. And so I was the senior intel officer for this organization. And in Alpha Company, 2nd Platoon Black Sheep was the
strike force.
The strike force, correct. And so they would come in and they would say, hey, sir, is this going to be a good one or is it just practice? Sir, tell us the truth. You just need practice. So you're sending us on all these raids so you can get better at IPB, right? So that was a joke. We would joke about it. They'd come in, see, sir, another dry hole. All right, we're only going to do 2 more. Come on, we need to get one. And so I remember the day they went out that night and they came in and they were joking. And they said, hey, sir, is another dry hole? I said, no, boys, you need to be careful. This is legit. Now, all of them were legit raids, right? They were all legit missions. Right. But that one
was more legit.
That was one of those one where you're like, okay, this is tier level National Command Authority type stuff, right? So, and we lost two of our Rangers that night. And I think about it all the time because there's nothing, it was a good target. They had all the ISR they could get. And that's just part of, the profession that we're in. And so I think about that all the time. And I remember thinking, what these boys they need to go on a mission right now.
Right away.
So we turned
back
them,
on the horse.
I mean, we turned them in hours. We turned them and went. And I'm dealing with it. They're dealing with it, and we just got to get going. That's just the way it is. So I think that is one of the hardest things I've ever had to deal with as an intelligence officer. Because you carry that guilt. I carry that more guilt than any other thing, because there's nothing I could have done to control it, right? So those are things that, you dream about and you think about and you rerun in your head, and that's just part of life. But yeah, I laugh. Sometimes I'll be running and I'll think about that conversation. Like, come on, sir, you're just trying to train here. There's another dry hole. We're just trying to get, yeah. And they used to joke about, the funniest thing was like, hey, sir, do you have enough bullets for your award? You have enough bullets for your deployment award? Come on, sir. Yeah. Give us a night off. So.
Yeah. When were you shot? Were you shot as a platoon leader or as an AS2?
So it was my second deployment in Afghanistan. We were on a patrol, and I was working for, I can't remember, Colonel Ryan? Mm-hmm. So I was working for him. He was the Ranger Reconnaissance Detachment, and they gave him a platoon. It was my platoon. They gave him, he's like, boys, let's go pick a fight. I was like, let's do it. So we were patrolling out in Kaust, Afghanistan, BCP 219, Mangrate. Yeah. And there was something fishy. You could just feel it, you just feel it. There was something going on. And so we dumped the logging truck. There was a lot of illegal wood cutting.
Illegal mining.
And we dumped the truck, made them take everything out, and made them put it all back in. They were out there for about 4 hours, these guys. And I remember my squad leader going, sir, we're getting shot after this, right? And we're like, yep, pretty sure we're gonna. You just felt it.
Yeah.
And so we went and we got caught in a near ambush. Like a near ambush. Imagine Ranger School in the hills of Dahlonega, and you're walking and you get caught in a near ambush. What do? Walk right into it, turn into it, and fire and go. Yeah. And that's exactly what the boys did, man. I mean, that's exactly what they did. One of my soldiers lost a lung. Another one lost his calf. One of them got shrapnel in the face. I got shot in the arm. I got lucky. I got shot right above my tricep, so my tricep tendon was ripped open. I was flayed like a fish. You could see everything all the way down to the bone. But we fought through it, I remember my company commander telling me once, he goes, we didn't know you were shot because you were still making calls, which is you just react. Because I was calling 9 lines. I was doing what I had to do, right? I had to call in birds, I authenticate Romeo Victor, let them fly, boys. And, the close air support was coming through. But I was doing the exact same thing that the platoon was doing. They turned into the ambush. They fought through it. We smoked some dudes. We got some injuries. Luckily, all of us made it out alive. Yeah. And I think about the reaction of that platoon was exactly like we had rehearsed over and over and over again. And I remember reading when I was in Cold Range, right? Yeah. These things, the more you bleed in training, the less you'll bleed in combat. The more you sweat in training, the less you'll bleed in combat. And your mind is thinking about these things. I'm trying to control birds. I'm trying to keep this guy alive. And I'm thinking, wow, this is exactly what that quote is about. And they executed flawlessly. One of my squad leaders earned the Silver Star, and he earned it. He was in the middle of the firefight. You could see rounds bouncing off his legs, not off his legs, but on the ground. Yeah. And he grabbed the PFC with the Gustav, and they're firing flechettes into these dudes. I mean, just boom. I had a mortar platoon, 2 mortarmen, free gunning the mortar. That I've never seen a 60 mortar red hot. They were just launching. Yeah. I mean, it was a good fight, and we made it. And I'm telling you, the training that you do at the range, all that stuff that you repeat over and over becomes muscle memory, and that's one of my proudest moments.
Yeah. Well, I'm summing up all those years of being a young ranger, being an NCO, being a junior officer. Then you go out and you kind of now you're finishing up your time in the Rangers, right? There's a lot of stuff that happens between there, of being a battalion S2. This is where I met you in One Panther, and now you're starting to take it to the next level of leadership, which is all that basic stuff. But the Army's expecting, and units are expecting different things from you. Was there any challenges that you had when you had to make that mental leap from I'm no longer reacting to near ambushes, and now I'm helping a battalion predict, how we should spend 12 months in northern Iraq, in Fob Summerall, and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think, the near ambush thing is a great example of how you don't react like that as a field grade officer. You don't do that anymore as a field grade officer. As a field grade officer, you got to think deep along. One of the things I tell the field grade officers here, the young captains that are about to be majors, I talk about that dreamer part of me. And I say to them, the thing you do as an hour major is you dream the future. You're taking resources, current resources right now, and a vision of your commander, and applying and understanding the environment and predicting what the future will look like with resources. You didn't do that as a captain. As a captain, you just executed. That creates imagination. You need to think about what it looks like in the future. And you can't do that by reacting to 50-meter targets. You have to sit down and think about, okay, what do I got? What does it have to look like? And what's it going to take me to get there? That's design. When I explain it to a lot of the field grade officers here, they get what design is. Because prior to that, design is just this nebulous thing. I learned that when I went to Quantico. I went to the Marine Corps. And it's not that the school is better or not better. It's that it's different. And for the first time in my life, even though I had been in joint operating forces, special operating forces like you have, right? And you're executing, knocking out targets, you're still thinking small. When I went to Quantico, I realized there's an entire Department of Defense out there. And everybody brings their best to the table. And you have to learn how to execute mission nested within the commander's philosophy, the president's strategic military objectives, and all that stuff. And you can't think small anymore. Yeah. You have to think big. I think that is what this school is so important.
That's why they're called field grades. You got to be able to see the field. You got to be able to see those. You said 15 degrees earlier, and now we're starting to get 45, probably 45, 50 degrees.
Do you know the difference between when I was a battalion commander? It was obvious to me the difference between me and my company commanders, the experience gap. I had like 10 years of experience on them. They needed more direct supervision. Not because they were good or bad, just they knew less experientially. But my brigade commander and I were pretty close. It's only like 3 to 5 years apart. He didn't need to give me a lot of detail.
Yeah.
Execute this. I'd be like, got it, sir. But you have to look down a lot. As a company grade, you're looking up a lot for guidance.
Right.
And down a lot to make sure they're getting executed. So I don't know what that balance is, but there's a lot of looking.
Yeah. You seem to, you explained it to me with a lot of clarity. Very simple terms as a battalion commander who's now seeing the field for the second time. You did your field grade time. Now you're a battalion commander. You're seeing the field, Las Vegas, Boise, Bighorn, Missouri, Salt Lake City, Ogden, right? You're seeing this. You've got to see the field at 80 degree, and you've got to communicate your intent to them. And you were able to do that at very simple terms that allowed those company commanders of all those recruiting companies to operate within your intent. You shared some of those documents with me. Can you tell us a little bit about some of those?
I think you're referring to my permission slip. And I want to tie it back because why it's important when you come up level, because you don't have that direct supervision anymore. So when you're directly supervising somebody, you can tell them every minute of the day what they have to do because you're really close. But when you pull back, like I was a battalion commander of a 488,000 square mile geographic battalion, that's how big the Salt Lake City recruiting battalion is. 480,000 square miles. There's no way I can directly influence every single day. So I have to provide broad but very specific guidance. And so I issued a permission slip. Most of the stuff that I've told you right now, Matt, is not a new idea that I came up with. They're ideas that I've heard and I've taken from other folks that I've learned, I've written down. Right now, I'm showing you, this is my green book. It's a good old-fashioned little notebook.
Yes.
Old school.
Yeah.
Because I'm old. And it has notes that I've taken across years.
All your favorite leadership stuff.
All my favorite leadership styles. Things that I like and things that I didn't like. Because you and I can talk about things that we didn't like, right?
Yeah.
So you take the things that you like. And my permission slip is a confluence of all that stuff. And in my permission slip, essentially what I said, it's a one-pager. Because when I was a sergeant, I hated studying those long, esoteric command philosophies. that said, and I can't. You know which ones I'm talking about. They're really long, and they're not really telling me anything. What I wanted my folks to know in my command philosophy was my leadership style. This is how I'm going to lead you, and this is the left and right limits you have. You know the mission, execute. So my permission slip was: is it right? Is it legal? Is it moral? Is it ethical? Is it right for the unit? Is it right for the Army? If so, don't ask me. Do it. You have my permission. And I signed it, the permission slip, so that they didn't have to ask me. Now, if it's not any of those things, if it's illegal, immoral, and ethical, don't do it. If you're not willing to stand for it, don't do it. And that clarified a lot of left and right limits for my command. Now, within this permission slip, then I in detail, these are the things that are the most important for me.
Yeah.
In recruiting command, prospecting, leads, future soldiers, admin, those are tactical tasks. We don't recognize them in the operational force, but in the Army, those are tactical tasks. So when I wrote that as a battalion commander, I said, prospecting, processing, future soldiers, and admin are your priorities in that order. So if you're done with number 1, move to number 2. If you're done with number 2, move to number 3. If you're done with number 3, move to number 4.
Yeah.
If you're done with number 4, go home. Why are you here? And it says that on there. I don't watch the clock.
Yeah.
Nor does Sergeant Major. If you know our priorities and your mission, you'll know your work hours. And that goes back to giving them that freedom to do what they needed to do, that little bit of choice. That's how I frame my permission slip, right? If you're willing to do it, do it. I had NCOs that was such a radical idea to them. I had one NCO, sir, hey, I really want to do this. I'm like, why are you asking me this question, Sergeant? You're a Sergeant first class. What does my permission slip say? He goes, sir, I didn't know that you were serious. I said, I signed it. I signed it on the take command. And he said to me, sir, true story, Matt. He goes, sir, I understand my left and right limits. We're making mission. That's all you can hope for as a leader, right?
Yeah.
Very clear. Now, I had 2. I don't know if you remember. I have 2.
Yeah,
I have guidance to the staff. Yeah. And this goes out to future battalion commander. You can find yourself very easily being the best staff commander in the brigade if you're not very clear of what you tell your staff you want them to do. Because the first time you have a staff. So you really don't know you've been a staff member, but you don't have a staff. So if you don't tell them exactly how you perform, how you want them to perform, and what they owe you, they'll either work for the brigade or you will do all the work for them and you won't command your battalion. So you got to be very clear. And that's what my second one is.
Yeah.
How I want the staff to support the permission slip. Or else you get a staff and they're not doing anything for you and you're doing all the work, you know?
Yeah. So now you're pouring everything you have into all these folks right here at CGSC. And now you told me a little bit about some of these things on our run the other day. What's your advice for me? And what's your advice for those of us that are continuing to lead, these field grades that are coming out of CGSC? They're about to show up. A bunch of them are going to show up to our organization and battalions. And we're going to get these folks. What is your advice for us, or what do you see in here?
I think that the folks that are coming out of the school want to do their best. I don't subscribe to these guys are soft. These men and women are not as hard as we used to be. It used to be harder. Back when it was hard. I don't subscribe to that one bit. They just need guidance, and they will execute. One of the hardest things for these folks to do is when a commander tells them, I'm not sure what I want, but I'll know it when I see it. That's not guidance, Mm-hmm. So that's number 1. As a commander, you have to tell them what it is that you want. You don't have to give them an answer, but you got to give them the end state. At the end of X, I want to look like this. That's enough. That's very hard to do, but that's where you get paid as a commander. And if you can do that, you can excel. Number 2 is they don't need to be babied. We don't need to baby them. They don't want to be babied, and they resent that. My daughter is 27. So she's a little bit younger or around the year group that this are. My daughter is self-sufficient. Mm-hmm. And it's not because of me. It's because of who she is. And so are the folks here. They want to excel. So you don't need to baby them. If you know me, which you do, you know that some people think I'm abrasive. Because I'm a very positive person, but the standard is the standard. And when they're not meeting the standard, you just got to let them know. Too often, I've spoken to officers here at this school, and they say to me, sir, that is the first time I've heard that. Thank you. I will try to correct it.
I love it.
That's not their fault. You got to tell them.
I think like leaders, like when it says a lot about you as a leader, when somebody makes a mistake or somebody's not meeting a standard or somebody's not doing, and the first person that you look at is yourself. That you didn't set them up for success. You didn't prepare them. You didn't let them know what the expectations were. You look at yourself and you start to blame yourself for their failure, right? I think it's so indicative of a leader if, when someone makes a mistake, the first thing they want to do is talk about how that person made a mistake or how that person messed it up or how that person doesn't do it as good as Raphael used to do it. The good ones take it upon themselves to help them get right.
You have to, because we're growing our replacements. Your son's in the Army. One of my nephews is a 13 Bravo in Hawaii. Another one is in the 11th Airborne.
And Ryan's at West Point now.
Exactly, right? So personally, we have an investment. And that is a reason, right? That is a reason because we have a personal investment. But the other reason is because we're told to, because if you go back to the original definition of Army leadership is purpose, direction, motivation, to complete the mission and make the organization better. So it's not like we need to. We're told we have to do it to make the organization better. So if you treat these young men and women who are leaving this as field grade officers, tell them what you want done, let them be creative in the way they solve that problem, and then when they fall short, let them know they fall short, they will execute. That's what they deserve.
Yeah.
And we own that.
Talk a little bit about your mental shift. I know you're pouring everything into these students that are here, but there's this other side of you that said, I'm ready for the next thing. I'm ready when I am no longer an officer in the Army.
Yeah.
What are you thinking about in that arena?
Because on prior service, Nicole and I started planning retirement in earnest. I'm not saying full-time, but in earnest, like real planning. Using the Army design methodology, if you will, right? And she was a logistics planner. So we started planning, where do we want to live? What are the options? What do we want to do? And so we've been very lucky because we've had 10 years to think about this and driving hard in the Army as well. So I don't plan to work. My father is the oldest of 23, same mom and dad. They're just, that's just the way they rolled back then. And he passed some years ago, and I'm the first one to move away from all of them. My mother's 84 years old, and my sister is battling terminal cancer. She's stage 4. And so one of the things that my wife and I want to do is reconnect with my family. I mentioned my daughter, she missed a lot of that growing up, and she didn't ask. She didn't say, hey, Dad, how about you join the Army and go deploy for 10 years? But she dealt with it like a trooper. And so one of the things that I want to do is be there for her now. I want to connect back to her. She's in an incredible, loving relationship with a boy that she's been, they've been living together for probably about 6 years now, and they're pretty serious, and I just want to be there for them whenever they need anything. So that's really what I'm doing. And then just connecting, I come from a very close-knit family. I'm the first one to go away. So going back to them and being part of their lives is something I'm really excited to do.
I think the greatest continuity book that anybody ever leaves, whatever job they leave, is the people that they leave and the quality of the people that they leave behind. You don't need a continuity book in the organization when I'm done with it. Just ask the people that are in it. Ask them how we should do, which direction we should go. They're all prepared. If you have left them prepared, and I'm 100% confident that anybody that served with you has pulled something from you. I have pulled, just as your teammate, as your friend, I have pulled things from you. All these officers and NCOs that you've ever served with have pulled things from you. So your contribution to the Army is exponential, that goes out there. So, I want to say thank you for, your service. More importantly, for all the things that you continue to do here, and you helped prepare me, to be a brigade commander. You helped me prepare to be a company commander. I remember when you used to give me advice on how to be a good company commander when we were out in 1P together. Those were some amazing things. I want to give you the opportunity to kind of, say your last thoughts, so think about what your last, any last advice or anything that you might have for Matt, or for anybody for that matter. But thanks for serving for so long. Thank you for being, such a big part of so many people's lives in the Army. These pictures, we got to find a way to put them up in a museum somewhere, and share them, or you find a good way to share them. But what's up on these walls is like manifests itself into the people that you send forward.
Can I add about the walls?
Yeah.
We talked earlier about when I was a battalion commander and even a company commander, I had nothing on the walls. And I found out how important putting stuff up is. At the time, you think, what a big deal. Nobody wants to brag, but it's important because your subordinates come in here and they see what you've done, and they see that either they can do it or they're like, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about. And so it happens a lot when these students come in here. When the students come in here, they've seen me in the platform flipping slides or having these conversations and challenging them on things. And then they come down in this office, and I've noticed when they come down here and they see these things, they're like, okay, this is my bona fides, right? Mm-hmm. He's credible. And so it's important to put these things up. This memorabilia, these artifacts are important for that reason. I didn't think that because you think you're humble and you don't want to humble brag, but it's absolutely important that you show your subordinates what you've done, and that one, they can do it, but also that you come from a place of credibility. And these things do that for you sometimes. So, yeah,
I love it. It put me in the right mood. It put me in the right, situation. I just looking at these things like the HHC 151, first of the 505th, the red, white, and blue, all American, the red, white, and black, and the yellow and gold. Like these are the same things that I have up in my office, and I have up at home. Our soldiers deserve to see what they're capable of. And then the people that helped us get to this point, they deserve to see and feel those things. Because that's the greatest reward, right? Is when you get to see somebody that you brought in the Army, somebody that you helped as a private, as a new lieutenant, and to see them go off and have not only a successful military career, but a successful life. Land this plane with like, okay, what advice or what are some of those things that we haven't been able to kind of talk about that you want to share?
First, I want to thank you for considering me. It's a big deal. Like, I'm rooting for you. Every time I see you come out on the list, I'm so proud of you and being connected to you. And I'm just so happy for where you're going and what you've done. And it's just, you're just bringing us along. And I just can't tell you how proud I am of you. I really sincerely am super proud of you. So thank you for considering me. I want to end with a couple of isms, maybe bring a little bit of levity here. So I want to talk about a couple of things, and I'm going to end with something that we all do, but we do it poorly. But first, I'm going to talk about declaring war with your higher headquarters. So this goes to any field grade officer, because I think as a battalion commander, as a lieutenant colonel, you've kind of learned this lesson. But as a field grade officer, new field grade officer, company commander, when you still deal in the binary zeros and ones, that dude's good, he's trying to get me, zeros and ones, dude, don't do. You got to remember that your high headquarters is not your enemy. If you declare war with your higher headquarters, you will lose. So figure out a way to understand what they're asking you to do. And the way you do it is by having a personal relationship with them. Unlike the Army, unlike the Navy, unlike the Air Force, and this is no denigration on them, but those organizations are built on platforms. We build a ship, we build a plane, and then we find the people to fly it or drive the ship. The Army is people. We're in the people business. So understand what your higher headquarters is doing by going up there and asking them and figuring out what they want. If you declare war with your higher headquarters, you will lose. That's number one. That's my number one ism.
Number one ism.
Number two ism. If you want to know how bad your order or plan is, publish it. Go ahead and publish it. Don't sit there and make it perfect. Don't think it's the most beautiful thing and then you fall in love with it. Publish it. The second you hit send, the first person that receives it and starts reading it, which they will tell you that you messed up paragraph 2 Alpha Bravo. Hey, sir, this doesn't make sense. All that stuff. And the first person that you read it is probably your senior non-commissioned officers. Okay? Because they understand what you don't sometimes. You can't put a battalion in the chow hall in 15 minutes. You and I can. So you and I could probably go to chow hall in 15 minutes to be out. But a battalion, there's not enough silverware. And so you publish your order early get feedback, and then your Fraggle is probably going to be better. And that gets me to the 1/3, 2/3 rule. And the reason we do it is because instead of following the 1/3, 2/3 rule, but you take 1/3 of the time for yourself, publish that order so that your subordinates can start reading and tell you how bad it is and start working on a Fraggle, you hold it till the very last minute, then they don't have time to provide you feedback. So publish your order early, publish it often, and you will get feedback. And feedback is a gift. You shouldn't get mad when people tell you that the order sucks.
Feedback is a gift.
Feedback is a gift. You want it. As a planning officer, the last thing you want as a planner.
How do you get people to give you honest feedback? Not just your order, but how do you get people to give you honest feedback as a person, about how you're doing, how am I doing as a teammate, how am I doing as a subordinate?
One, so if you want feedback, you have to provide feedback too. See, so it starts with you. Right? So if I'm not a person that provides you feedback, how can I expect you to do it for me? Right? So you have to be open and honest. You have to find every opportunity with leaders or subordinates in the appropriate place and timing to say, sir, ma'am, from my perspective, this is what I saw. If you do that, then people understand that that's the kind of person you are. Then when you ask for feedback and you're genuine about it at a whatever public setting, hey, team, what do you think about this order? Or in your email, here's the order, feedback absolutely required. Make sure feedback is mandatory. But people have already seen that you do it. You can't just do it all of a sudden. It has to be a practice. You have to show that is the kind of person you are. And it's reps. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You can't just say, I want your feedback, and then somebody gives it to you and you go, that's stupid. Or you never provide feedback.
Yeah. And that's why people refer to you as a good dude. Thanks, brother. I appreciate this.
I could talk to you for hours. And I hope that this is value added. Like anybody else that's still on active duty, I'm on the global till 31 January of 2025. So if anybody wants to get a hold of me, Raphael, I'm the only Raphael Vasquez. So you don't have to add numbers. Find me on the global, shoot me a note. Anything I can do for you and anybody else.
I would say you're not hard to find, but you are hard to find. Yeah.
I'm bad at keeping in touch.
Yeah. Well, you have a burner phone every 6 months.
Oh, well, we don't.
Every 6 months you roll comms.
We didn't get into that though. That wasn't one of my stories. But it's still a practice I follow.
Yeah. Thanks, brother. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, sir.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening today. I hope we sparked some thoughts about the people that have inspired you to be who you are today. I hope you share some of your thoughts and better yet demonstrate them for the people in your life. Our pursuit is to get a little bit better every day. Progress equals small victories stacked on top of each other, building like compound interest. Keep stacking these positive habits like getting up early, working your butt off, learning something new, being positive, and surrounding yourself with phenomenal people. Please share your comments at the links in the show notes and DM us at Teach Me to Fish podcast on Instagram or Facebook. Looking forward to our next conversation.
Times don't fly too high. Be sure to keep the ground in sight. Fly forever if you keep it tight. Love the world, but keep the sky on your mind.